Today we're going to be dealing with food stewards. Now, I know this is a hashed out topic. A lot of training is going on about that. There's a lot of articles that have already been written about this. But I want to, in this training session, just take the word food stewards and then incorporate it with and show you how it works with regards to the Consumer Protection Act. And obviously, we've got the mandatory disclosure form, which is supposed to be part of your offer to purchases as well as your mandates. So for you that are not familiar with me, I'm Yanni Kutsia. I'm from the firm Botha Kutsia Mapekula Attorneys. We are in Roodepoort, and obviously our main focus is on conveyancing. As I've mentioned, we're going to be looking at the food stewards clause itself. We're also going to be looking at how the Consumer Protection Act is drafted to protect consumers specifically with defects. And then obviously also look at your disclosure, the mandatory disclosure document that has to be completed by your seller. So when it comes to food stewards, obviously there's the word is exactly what it states. So in the Roman Dutch law, food stewards is taken from there, and it is physically translated as pushing an asset with your foot. In other words, jy stoot hom met jou voet. I don't know if you are familiar with the term where they say that when people come to view a vehicle, they are a tire kicker. In other words, they walk around the vehicle and inspect the vehicle. And that is exactly what the food stewards clause is. That's an inspection of the asset that is being sold. In order for the parties to then make an informed decision as to whether the buyer wants to proceed with the offer to purchase, he has to inspect the property. Now, when it comes to inspection of the property, the food stewards is then divided into two aspects, being the latent defect as well as a patent defect. So if the property just refers to food stewards, the law stipulates that it actually includes both patent and latent defects. But that does not mean that your seller will just be able to walk away from a transaction or from any claims of defects. It's all going to depend on the interpretation by the courts of that defect itself. So if we look at a patent defect, I always remind myself that a patent defect, in other words, it's a patent. If you are familiar with patent law, the patent registration, they want to register their patent for people to be able to see the patent. That's like McDonald's. The big M is a registered patent. Everybody that sees the M will know exactly that it is a McDonald's. So that is how I remember a patent defect. It's something that can be easily seen by way of a reasonable inspection by a reasonable person. It's not expected of you to be an expert. A reasonable person should be able to determine whether there's a patent defect. When it comes to a latent defect, on the other hand, it's a bit more intricate, and this is where you have to have specialized, shall we say, education to be able to cite or look and find a latent defect. Mostly, a latent defect is therefore something that you can't see with a naked eye. Even though you do an inspection, you might not be able to see, well, you will definitely not be able to see the latent defect. Under latent defect, we must remember that's something like a leaking roof. But if the roof is now, there's a stain on the ceiling that had to do with a leak from the rain, then obviously it becomes a patent defect, because now you can easily see that there is a stain on the roof, which means there should be a leak of the roof, and therefore it's a patent defect. An example of a patent defect further will be something like a broken mirror, missing tiles or broken tiles, hanging or sagging gutters, and even a sagging roof. If the purchaser walks outside, views the property, you'll be able to see that the knock of the roof is sagging. And he can't then later on say, well, he did not see it, he did not know it, because the law expects of him to actually conduct a reasonable inspection of the property before he actually signs and agrees to the terms of the contract. Then I'm just going to refer to a few case law before I look at the seller's liability. And obviously in 1977, in the case of Holmdene Brickworks versus Roberts Construction, the court there determined the footstool clause, and I'm going to quote from the decision itself. Sorry about that. I'm going to quote from the decision itself. The court says, broadly speaking, in the contents, a defect may be described as an abnormal quality or attribute which destroys or substantially impairs the utility or effectiveness of the thing that is sold for the purpose for which it has been sold or for which it is commonly used. Such a defect is latent when it is one which is not visible or discoverable upon an inspection of the thing that is sold. So there the court, for the first time, differentiated between a latent defect and a patent defect. Then we got to 2008, and in 2009, the Supreme Court of Appeal, actually that's what the SCA stands for, in Odendaal versus Ferreira, where the court actually looked at a specific matter and then had to make a decision as to whether the blatant non-disclosure from the seller's side was deemed to be a latent defect. It also looked at whether it is just the item itself, in other words, the property itself, or is there any other influence that can that might hinder the use of the property, and that might be declared as a patent or a latent defect. So in this case, what happened was the seller sold the property, and he failed to obtain statutory approval for building alterations that he sold, and he also did not disclose this to the buyer. After signing the sale agreement, the buyer then discovered that there is a lack of the statutory required building approval or the building plan approvals, and he then instructed the bond attorneys not to proceed with registration until the plans for the property was submitted to him. The seller, claiming that the property was sold footstewards, he alleged that the purchaser was therefore obstructing the transfer process. He placed the purchaser on terms for the purchaser repudiating the agreement and subsequently cancelled the agreement, and obviously then sought to evict the purchaser from the property. In this instance, the purchaser also moved into the property. The court then looked at the sale agreement as well as the footstewards clause and came to the conclusion that the lack of the statutory building approvals are a defect and will interfere with the ordinary use of the property, thus satisfying the test that was outlined in the Holmdene Brickworks case. However, the court found that because the purchaser failed to prove deliberate concealment, in other words, the seller didn't tell him this, but the seller was not willful in his actions. So he did not deliberately conceal that the defect, the seller was not liable. So consequently, the footstewards applied as the seller was unable, and the seller was able to rely on the protection of the clause, even though he did not disclose the fact that there was no building plans for the property. Another case, which is a very interesting case, here it's Gladstone House versus Inac. Now, this is also a very old case, but it's interesting because it deals with property itself. And I thought I'll quote that for you guys as well. So in this instance, the property was sold and there was a statute on the property. And this statute was declared a national monument. So even though the statute was easily seen by the purchaser, you can see it, he did not know that this statute was actually an approved monument. And and therefore he could not redevelop the property. This was obviously not disclosed to the buyer. And the court took a broader look on whether the sculpture or the monument was a national monument and prevented the development, and if this actually formed part of a latent defect. The seller again in this instance tried to lie on the footstewards clause, but here the court actually said no and allowed the purchaser to claim damages from the seller for not disclosing the fact that statute was actually part of a monument national monument, and it hindered the physical development of the property. And therefore, that statute, even though it was easily seen, was actually a latent defect, not because of the statute itself, but because of the rights that attached to that statute that was on the property. The last case, again, a 2015 case, is very recent. And here the court had to look, it's Ishmael versus Earth 87 Dahlstrom. So here the court had to look at a non-disclosure of a unregistered reserve in front of the property. So this reserve then meant that the purchaser could not develop 397 square meters of the property. The total size of the property was 1,322. So it's basically a quarter of the property that could not be used by the purchaser. And the court in this instance found that the defense raised by the seller, that it was actually a part of the food search clause, the court found that it was an abnormal quality which impaired the utility of the property. However, the seller could not rely on the food search clause, and it was proved that the seller had prior knowledge of this defect and intentionally, you see the wording, intentionally concealed it from the purchaser. So in this instance, the seller had the intention not to tell the purchaser about it, because he knew that if the seller knew about that the purchaser might offer him a lesser purchase price for the property, because a third of the property could not be developed. As I said, we'll then have a look at the seller's liability, and this is my opinion on the matter. So in general, obviously, we can then look at the fact that the seller is liable. Even though there might be a food search clause on the property, the seller can be seen to be liable for defects in the property. How will we determine whether the seller is liable for the defect? You will have to look at when the defect was present. In other words, is the defect present at the signature of the agreement, or did it only transpire after the agreement was signed? If it transpired at the signature of the agreement, in other words, it was already in place when the agreement was signed, the seller will in all probability never be liable because that will be a latent defect, a patent defect. If, however, from the date that the property is sold to the date of transfer or the date of occupation, something goes wrong with the property, the seller is still liable for that to be repaired, because onus and risk only passes over to the purchaser on registration of transfer. So in instances like that, the purchaser will most probably be able to successfully claim damages from the seller, because the defect arose after the agreement was signed, but prior to the registration of transfer that occurred. So the other thing that we've also now seen from the case law is that three things must be visible in order for you to hold must be present in order for you to hold the seller liable. So the seller must have been aware of the defect, he must have hid this defect from the purchaser, and he had to do this with the intention to defraud. So you will understand that this third one is sometimes overlooked. Was it the seller's intention to defraud the purchaser when he did not tell him about this latent defect? If the intention of the purchaser of the seller was actually to defraud the purchaser, in other words, to get the purchaser to sign the agreement, knowing that there's this huge defect, then the seller will not have the protection of the food search clause. If we then move on to the Consumer Protection Act, and even though we are looking at the property condition report later, and that was only put in place by the new act, the Property Practitioners Act in 2019, the Consumer Protection Act actually came into existence in 2008 already. And you can see that when the act came into being, that section 40 of the act actually prohibits an estate agent from marketing a property without full disclosure of the defects. So the advantage that we have here is because the Consumer Protection Act only deals with property sold in the ordinary course of business. Agents weren't actually taken on by purchasers for failure to disclose any defects. It has always been the onus was always placed on the agents to actually make sure of any defects in the property in order for them to actually be able to tell the purchaser of what the defects are. Also, remember that in the ordinary course of business, you then would think, well, you're buying from a developer. But what if you have a situation where you've got a property investor who buys and sells properties? So he buys the property, he then lets it for a certain time period, and then he sells it. He then utilizes the cash to buy a new property, rents it for a little bit, and then sells it again. So that is then his business, to buy and sell property. So in my opinion, that investor client will not have the protection of the FTSE clause, because under the Consumer Protection Act, he will be liable for any defects. And the Act actually states that when you're dealing with a developer or a person that buys and sells property in the ordinary course of business, that a FTSE clause cannot be inserted in those sale agreements. So if we're looking at specifically at Section 55, it stipulates that a property must be sold in a reasonable, suitable for use, for which is generally intended. It is of a good quality, it is in good operating order, and it is free from any defects. So the property can therefore, according to the Consumer Protection Act, be sold by a seller to a buyer in a specified condition. He must expressly agree to accept that defective property. If he does not agree to it, then you, as an agent, you should not take that offer, because the seller will be liable for the repairs. You must then be able to find a purchaser that's willing to take over the property in the condition that it is. A further exclusion in terms of the the Consumer Protection Act, as we've seen, Section 40 prohibits you from marketing it. We've seen that Section 55, that the goods must be in good order. We've seen that it's excluded for any properties that sold without that sold like normal man to man. So in other words, arm's length transactions. It's not sold by a developer. But there's a further exclusion in terms of Section 5.2. That exclusion determines that if the property is sold from the developer to a business entity, in other words, a company, closed corporation, or a trust, and that business, closed corporation, or trust has a asset value or an income of more than 2 million rand, then the Act also does not cover that type of transaction. And in that instance, a FTSE clause can actually be inserted in the agreement, and the seller there will then be able to be entitled to claim FTSE, even though it is a developer selling that property to a prospective purchaser. Right, so then we get to the last section of our training today, and that is the mandatory disclosure form. So guys, it's very important for you to note that the mandatory disclosure is, I would say, as important, if not more important, than your actual sale agreement. The reason why the emphasis is on the importance of that is because the Act actually prescribes that it must be obtained from your seller, and not only when the agreement is signed, the sale agreement that is. You have to obtain that from your seller, or even on a rental from your landlord at the time of taking that mandate from the landlord. If you take it any time after the mandate, if that is dated after the date of your mandate, then technically in terms of the Act, there is no mandatory disclosure form because you technically did not obtain it prior to taking the mandate and prior to taking mandate for sale or for rental. So it's very important for you to make sure that you actually obtain this at the correct time. Another thing that you must keep in mind is that the mandatory disclosure must be provided to all prospective buyers and tenants. So the Act actually talks of a prospective purchaser and a tenant. So not the tenant that's already signed the agreement. It's anybody that comes to view the property must have access to that disclosure document. And if you did not obtain it at the time when you signed your mandate, then you did not comply with the Act, and you can therefore be in serious trouble here. The agreement then, it must then be attached to your agreement once the agreement is signed, and it must be signed by your seller at that, your purchaser at that stage, because your seller would have already signed it. We are inundated with situations where we receive offer to purchasers where the mandatory disclosure document has not been signed by the purchaser as yet, and then it has to be signed. So even though we run around and we get it signed, when I say we, I mean our officers as well as the agents involved, run around to get it signed. Technically, the Act has been transgressed, and if anybody takes you on, the punishment is severe. Now, I know that as estate agents, you all make a lot of money. So a 15,000 Rand fine that's imposed from the PPRA might not frighten you, and you might just pay the 15,000 Rand because the Act says you must pay it, and you obviously didn't obtain the relevant mandatory disclosure prior to the mandate being signed, and therefore you pay the 15,000 Rand, everything's fine. Unfortunately, I have to inform you that everything is not fine, because even though you've got this 15,000 Rand penalty imposed by the PPRA, any damages suffered by the seller or the buyer as a result of a defect that then comes out later is your responsibility as the agent. They can then claim their damages from you. So if it is a leaking roof and the cost for repairs to that roof is going to be 120,000 Rand, then you're going to be in for a 15,000 Rand fine from the PPRA plus the 120,000 Rand repair costs of that roof because the property disclosure document was not signed. If it is not signed timeously, it is actually then a situation where it is deemed that there is no such agreement. So in other words, there is no disclosure document. And it is then deemed further that because the disclosure is not signed and attached or obtained properly, that there is then no mandatory disclosure, it is then obviously also interpreted that the property is sold without any defects. Any agent that's worth its salt will know that no property is actually sold without a latent or a patent defect. There's always a defect. There's always a cracked tile. There's always rising damp that nobody could see. And if that then occurs and you did not obtain this mandatory disclosure form, as an agent, you're going to be liable for those charges. And unfortunately, nobody will be able to protect you from that because, first of all, the Footscray clause only protects the seller. It doesn't protect you. And secondly, the PPRA, the legislation, actually confirms that you as the agent is liable for those damages. So guys, please make sure that you obtain this document timeously, that you have it signed timeously and correctly, and that it does form part of your offer to purchase from the initial start when that agreement is concluded. The purchaser must sign it and it must be attached. There will then obviously always be two different signature dates on the mandatory disclosure, because the seller would have signed that document when you did the mandate, and then the buyer signs that document only once the offer to purchase is concluded. On that as well, remember that the signing of the documentation, when you do, the seller goes out of his way and he discloses the defects in the mandatory disclosure form. Please make sure that you familiarize yourself when you do the offer to purchase, because some time would have lapsed from when you took the mandate to when the property is sold, and you might have forgotten the fact that there are certain items that the seller has excluded, or that is that in terms of the property condition report is actually confirmed is defective, and you do not amend your offer to purchase appropriately. then you're going to have a situation where your mandatory disclosure form actually contradicts your sale agreement. And then the seller, even though you disclosed in the mandatory disclosure that something is not right, as an agent, you neglected to make that part of the agreement, and therefore the seller will be liable for damages. Any damages claimed by the purchaser. Specifically look at the plan situation, guys. If the seller discloses to you that he does not have plans in the mandatory disclosure form, don't just sign the offer to purchase without looking at the clauses dealing with building plans, because in terms of the agreement, the seller is then liable to provide those building plans, even though he disclosed that he does not have those building plans in the mandatory disclosure form. Okay, so trust that you guys enjoyed the training and that it is helpful. And is there any questions from the attendees?
I just think at the moment there's so much pressure on these poor agents. It's almost like they all need legal degrees and, with the changes and the CPA and all sorts. So, yeah, quite
Yeah,
quite a lot to
100%.
take.
Yeah, no, thanks. And like I say, just if they just do what is expected of them in terms of the training, and